everyone. Today we will be going over physical and cognitive development in early childhood. And so the first thing I want to talk about is physical development. So the brain is rapidly growing during this period of life, but is a little bit slower than in infancy. And so the brain size doesn't change as much as its connectivity is growing. And myelination is continuing to form, allowing for faster transmissions of action potentials or messages between neurons, and pruning of unneeded or unused cells, leaving more room for connections and for more growth. So the prefrontal cortex is a location for the most rapid growth during this stage. And the prefrontal cortex is continually growing until you are about 25 years of age and is responsible for inhibiting behavior, which is one of the major reasons why we see young children acting on impulse rather than stopping and thinking about their behavior. It's also responsible for planning, organizing, paying attention, or dividing your attention between two tasks like listening to this lecture and writing at the same time. And so the prefrontal cortex is also important for language development, as we'll talk about a little bit later. So in terms of gross motor development, early childhood is marked with increased athleticism and better coordination of their movements. For example, what we see within brain development is that myelination for hand-eye coordination is developing and is typically complete about 4 years of age. So here you can see this obvious connection between the brain and also motor development or physical development. So young children's fine motor development at this stage includes being able to hold a pencil without gripping it with their whole hand, like those big crowns that are especially for kiddos that are young in age. And so this typically occurs about 3 or 4 years of age and helps to increase their writing ability. So as we can see, the chapter highlights nutrition and exercise as a significant part of physical development for early childhood. Especially this is important to consider as this is the foundation for healthy eating later in life, because they're being taught what to eat and how to eat, and this is practiced particularly within this age. So specifically talking about obesity, the U.S. has one of the highest childhood obesity rates in the world. 12% of kids ranging in age from 2 to 5 are obese, and kids as young as 5 are actually being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which typically has an adult onset due to eating and exercise habits. So poor eating and poor exercise habits. A third of kids' calories are actually coming from restaurants or fast food, which means that they are getting too many calories because one meal at a fast food restaurant is about half the kids' recommended calories for the day. Eating behaviors, nutrition, and exercise are definitely having ramifications for our children that leads to serious health problems for their whole lives, such as the type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and later cardiovascular disease. So as such, these are preventable disorders with modifiable behaviors. So psychologists have a special place within this fight against obesity, as we're trained on influencing or changing maladaptive behaviors like encouraging diet and exercise. So this may look like teaching parents and kids about healthy eating, eating on a regular schedule, modeling healthy eating behaviors, making meal times fun for the family, and planning out meals ahead of time with caregivers. So this is a topic we'll come back to in mid-childhood, but it provides you an idea of what that discussion may look like. So next we'll talk about cognitive development. Specifically, we'll talk about Piaget and Vygotsky's theories on the development of cognition. So during this stage in childhood, Piaget describes symbolic function, which typically occurs between the ages of 2 and 4. So during this substage, the child engages in pretend play and where they demonstrate the ability to use an object or event to stand for one another. So interestingly, this is seen in relation to their language development in that they are not able to see or quite understand this arbitrariness. So for example, they may ask, why is it called a crane? Or why is her name Emma? So those kind of questions where you don't know how to answer, they're just called that for whatever reason. And then kiddos may continue to ask, well, why? So because of this, Piaget viewed language as influencing children's cognitive development. So what you also see during this substage is egocentrism. And egocentrism is where children have a tendency to perceive the world in terms of themselves, and that they fail to understand that the world appears differently to different observers. And so this is believed to be based on episodic memory, which is based on our own experience. So this is like someone who only sees the story from their perspective and doesn't understand or fails to take into consideration others' perspectives for explaining the story. So egocentrism, or theory of mind, is used to help explain the behavior of children who have been diagnosed actually with an autism spectrum disorder. So we also see a rigidity of thought in which children ignore the process and only focus on the appearance. So during this stage, children cannot pick up on contradictions, and so they don't get or understand most adult humor. And so you also see an irreversibility where they cannot mentally undo an action that they have actually witnessed. So if you hide something under one blanket or washcloth and then switch it to the other cloth right in front of them, the children will still look under that original cloth that you hid it under. So related to rigidity of thought, children engage in this semi-logical reasoning and have limited social cognition, where their reasoning is somewhat logical but lacks some basic components of logic and are still developing that understanding of other people's intentions or intentionality. So they may think he hit me, and rather than thinking that he tripped and accidentally hit me while trying to catch himself. So again, not yet understanding people's intentionality. So around 4 to 7 years of age, children begin using more formal reasoning skills, but it's still based on their own interpretation or their own thoughts and not necessarily systematic investigation. So in other words, they know something, but they don't know how they know it. So these are the why years, where they ask a bunch of questions, signaling that they have an interest in discovering why things are the way they are. And so you oftentimes see during the stage again, kiddos are asking why questions. Why is the sky blue, for example? So examples of this stage of cognition include this passage of a pre-operational child's recipe for turkey or Thanksgiving dinner. After reading through the passage, you can see that the child focuses on the appearances of things to explain the recipe, but not the actual process. So as we can see from the passage, get the kind of turkey with no feathers, or get the kitchen real hot and cook the turkey. Here's another example. Note that the reasoning at the end, you have to be married in order to use a stove. So what is this child basing the recipe or instructions on? Maybe a good question. And what we see is that their own experience of watching an adult prepare the meal is what they're basing the recipe or their instructions on. So the child's ability to pay attention changes significantly during the preschool years. So preschool children are influenced strongly by the features of a task that stand out, that they can see, or are salient to themselves. So this deficit can hinder problem solving or performing well on many different tasks. So by age 6 or 7, children attend more efficiently to the dimensions of a task that are relevant. So this is believed to reflect a shift in cognition or cognitive control of attention. So at this time, children are more likely to pay attention to attractive but irrelevant information rather than boring, relevant information. So this highly impacts their attention span or their ability to sustain their attention on one particular task. So in short-term memory, individuals retain information for up to 15 to 30 seconds long, assuming there is no rehearsal, which can help keep that information in short-term memory for a much longer period. Differences that we see in memory span occur across the ages due to several different things. So what we mentioned earlier is rehearsal. So older children rehearse items more often than younger children do. We see that the speed and the efficiency of processing that information, we see differences within that. And so the speed with which a child can process information is an important aspect of the child's cognitive abilities. And so it may reflect where they are within that their cognitive development. So young children can remember a great deal of information if they're given appropriate cues and prompts. And so sometimes the memories of preschoolers seem to be erratic, where they remember some things but they don't remember others. But these inconsistencies may be due to some degree that the result of inadequate prompts or cues. And so you may see with younger kiddos that are preschool age that it's easier to help prompt them or cue them to by placing different pictures around the house to cue their memory that, oh, I need to, once I'm in the bathroom, I need to brush my teeth, for example. So in terms of cognitive development, using Vygotsky's theory, the zone of proximal development is Vygotsky's term for the range of tasks too difficult for children to master alone, but can be learned with the guidance and assistance of adults or more skilled children. And so this definitely has an impact on education for early childhood. So the lower limit is the level of problem solving reached by the child working independently. The upper limit is the level of additional responsibility the child can accept, but with the assistance of an able instructor. So if it's a teacher or another kiddo that understands the task at hand. So Vygotsky's emphasis on the zone of proximal development underscores his belief in the importance of social influences, especially instruction, on children's cognitive development. So it helps to influence and helps them to learn. So the term scaffolding refers to changing the levels of support. So over the course of a teaching session, a more skilled person adjusts the amount of guidance to fit the student's current performance level. So if more instruction is needed, then they provide more instruction. And if less instruction is needed, then the amount of instructions is reduced, again, matching the child's ability. So dialogue is an important tool of scaffolding in the zone of proximal development. So this looks like taking the student step by step, demonstrating the action, having them practice, directing them and correcting them in order for them to learn the practice. And we're also modeling this behavior. And ultimately what we're doing is influencing that child's ability to use their own private speech to direct themselves. So young children's understanding sometimes gets ahead of their speech development. So many of the oddities of young children's language sound like mistakes to adult listeners, but from the child's perspective, they're not. So as children go through early childhood, their grasp of the rules of language increases. So this includes morphology, semantics, and pragmatics. So morphology is where they put the appropriate endings on verbs. So they use prepositions, articles, and various forms of the verb to be. So children demonstrate knowledge of morphological rules with plural forms of nouns, possessive forms of nouns, and the third person singular and past tense forms of verbs. So as children move beyond the two-word stage, their knowledge of meanings or semantics rapidly advances. So the speaking vocabulary of a 6-year-old ranges from 8,000 to 14,000 words. And according to some estimates, the average child of this age is learning about 22 words a day. So children also learn a tremendous amount during this time regarding the appropriate use of language in different contexts. So this is known as pragmatics. So children become better conversationalists. They speak differently to a younger kiddo versus someone that is their same age peer. And they also speak differently when talking with adults. So they begin to understand, and this is another quick example within this period, is that they begin to understand that bathroom jokes are only funny in certain contexts and under certain circumstances. So early childhood can be roughly broken into child and concept-centered types of education. So in child-centered education, the whole child is emphasized, and so not just academics, but physical and socio-emotional development too. And their instruction is organized around the child's interests, and it's usually less structured, and most learning is done by doing. So concept-centered, however, is focused on the mastery of academic concepts like rote memorizations, drills, paper and pencil activities, less choice of activities, and lots of seat work. And so this is typically what we see in the public education form. So this method is associated with somewhat slower growth of academic skills and reduced excitement for the process of learning. So in terms of education for minority children, for example, ethnic minority groups and possibly low SES, particular to some examples that I'll be talking about here in a little bit. So there is a concern for catching them up on academic skills to peers with more home support. And so some are effective while others are not. And this is a highly dependent variable in terms of the training of the teachers in the classroom. So some children can make great gains and gain a similar footing for academic skills, but many benefits aren't maintained after 2 years. So this isn't so surprising, as there are many factors within these communities that are significantly influencing academic performance just beyond the classroom. And so I think of a family who is considered low socioeconomic status, where the parents are working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and to provide for their family. And so I don't know how having parents as teachers will reinforce these skills when the parents are coming home exhausted or stressed. And so just giving consideration really to the practicality of the education, and also looking at those different factors that are influencing academic performance, just as an example. So other cultures in early childhood education includes specialized education in music, for example, are taught in Japan and less academically focused, yet they still continue to see positive outcomes for their children, whether that's IQ or academic performance. So interestingly, in developing countries, we see more of an academically focused education curriculum.